Welcome to today's Explainer, everyone. I am absolutely pumped to dive into this one because we are blending ancient philosophy, some really cool what-ifs, and a massive, very controversial modern megaproject. We're talking about land ownership, indigenous reclamation, and the literal limits of urban density. Let's get right into it.
To set the stage here, our editor Elton sent over a totally fascinating hook for this explainer. He pointed me to a specific verse in the Bible, Leviticus 25:23, which explicitly forbids the permanent sale of land. It actually reads, "The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers." It's a pretty profound concept, right? Essentially arguing that we humans can only ever be tenants on the earth, never the true owners. And this ancient text anchors a really massive modern thought experiment. Elton wrote to me and said, I've often wondered what would have happened in North America if the early Christian settlers had actually followed biblical rules. He asked this huge paradigm-shifting question. What if Manhattan could not have been sold? What if, instead of that infamous $24 purchase, it could only ever have been leased from the indigenous tribes who originally lived there? Would Manhattan be better or worse off today? Well, Elton, you have gotten your wish, at least on 10 acres of Canadian land. We don't even have to imagine this scenario, because it's literally playing out right now, in real time. Okay, let's dive into this.
Welcome to Senakw. This right here is the proposed design for the largest First Nations economic development project in Canadian history. This is happening right in the heart of Vancouver, British Columbia, specifically on the False Creek waterfront directly across from downtown. The Squamish Nation actually partnered with a private developer called Westbank to completely transform this space. Just look at it. It is visually stunning, it looks futuristic, and it is unapologetically massive.
But you know what's truly mind-blowing? The footprint. This whole massive vision is being proposed on just 10.5 acres of land. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the equivalent of just 4 standard city blocks. This little slice of land was once part of a much larger 34-hectare ancestral village, a really vital hub for indigenous trade and culture, which has now been returned to the Squamish Nation. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth is this scale legally possible in a city like Vancouver, which is famous for its super strict building codes? Well, the answer lies in its designation. Because this is officially reserve land, the Squamish Nation can develop it completely independently of traditional City of Vancouver zoning bylaws. So while the surrounding Kitsilano neighborhood is largely capped at buildings of just 5 stories, those rules, they simply do not apply here. So let's break down exactly what that zoning freedom allows them to build. As I mentioned, this is a 50-50 partnership between the Squamish Nation and Westbank Corporation. And together, they are cramming 6,080 purpose-built rental homes into those 10.5 acres. We are talking about 11 high-rise towers, with the tallest ones reaching up to 59 stories high, again, right next to a low-rise neighborhood. The sheer ambition of this project is just awe-inspiring. And the economics? They are just as staggering as the architecture. A recent financial report prepared for the Squamish Nation updated the projected cash flow for the nation and the developer to a jaw-dropping $20 billion. $20 billion! To jumpstart this massive economic engine, the federal government even stepped in with a $1.4 billion low-interest loan to finance the first half of the project. So, financially speaking, this is a massive triumph for indigenous reclamation. Let's shift gears a bit to their environmental vision, because the developers aren't just going for size here. They're aiming to set a global standard. They actually want Senakw to be Canada's first large-scale net-zero carbon housing development. To pull this off, they're targeting operational carbon, meaning they'll use innovative fossil fuel-free blackwater systems for heating and cooling, and embodied carbon, which means using manufacturing materials that don't heavily pollute during their creation. And this brilliantly illustrates that approach. To hit those embodied carbon goals, the design leans heavily on local mass timber, pairing it with these lush green spaces interwoven all throughout the public plazas. It's a really striking vision of earth-centered urban design. It pays homage to Coast Salish culture while absolutely pushing the boundaries of green architecture. Section 2. The density debate. Utopian vision versus urban reality. As you might expect, whenever you have a project of this totally unprecedented scale moving forward without traditional municipal oversight, you're going to hit some serious friction. And the pushback from Vancouver's urban planning community has been fierce. It's really shifted the conversation from a utopian environmental vision to the harsh logistical realities of extreme urban density. To help us understand the skepticism, Let's look at what Ray Spaxman has to say. He's the former chief planner for the city of Vancouver, and he has been highly critical of the lack of transparent public consultation. He stated pretty flatly, all that we've got is the propaganda. I don't think it's going to be especially livable at that density. I can't quite understand the design. He's voicing a major concern here. Cramming so many units into such a tiny space without traditional city oversight could be a recipe for disaster.
At this density, we are looking at the equivalent of 235,000 people per square kilometer. For context, that is 5 times denser than Canada's current highest density neighborhood. Critics point out there are no new schools included on site, no community centers, and the whole thing relies on just one single access road carved through a neighboring public park for an estimated 10,000 to 12,000 new residents. So we're really left with this fascinating, monumental dichotomy. On the one hand, Senakw is an unparalleled triumph of indigenous economic empowerment. It's a $20 billion reclaiming of ancestral land, aiming for net zero carbon sustainability. But on the other hand, it's a hyper-dense luxury development bypassing traditional city planning, which critics strongly argue will overwhelm local infrastructure and won't actually solve the affordability crisis for everyday people. Which brings us right back full circle to Alton's original thought experiment about permanent ownership versus leasing the land. Vancouver is experiencing exactly what happens when the original stewards of the land take back control and develop it according to their own rules, completely outside the jurisdiction of the modern city that grew around them. It leaves us with a really profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Would your town be better off if it turned some of its land over to the original indigenous owners to be managed? I'll leave you to think about that one. Thanks for joining me today.